Where does Notre Dame rank among the top college football programs heading into 2023? Luke Smith and I give our list of the top 15 coming up next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, and welcome to Locked On Irish. It is Thursday, April 6th, and thank you for making this your first listen of the day. As always, you can find us on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you are watching along on YouTube, please like the video below and subscribe. And if you're listening to the pod, please hit that subscribe button as well. And hey, a 5-star rating wouldn't hurt either. I'm Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018 and have been covering college football for the two major sports networks ever since. And in today's episode, my good friend and former co-host Luke Smith and I will go over our list of the top 15 programs in college football. This was a really fun exercise to do, and I'm going to be honest, it's a little bit more difficult than I thought it'd be. And if you don't believe me, try it out for yourself, because I don't really think there's a perfect way to do it. Maybe you'll find one, but it's a lot more subjective than you might expect. So we both had different sets of criteria. We went over our top 15. We agreed on some, we disagreed on others, and it was a really fun conversation that I hope you guys will enjoy. So let's bring him in. All right, Luke Smith is back on the show, and today we're going to figure out the top 15 college football programs heading into the year 2023. And right off the bat, I got to say, some of the criteria that we have discussed here, it might get violated. But what we are doing here is I have my own set of criteria. I made my own list, and then Luke has his own criteria, and Luke made his own list. So there's going to be some differences there. But Luke, tell me, take me through some of the criteria that you were thinking about as you were creating this list.
It's a loose interpretation of things. And as you alluded to, I have no doubt that to some extent, I'm probably going to violate some of my own rules. But when I thought about this, and as I started to do this exercise, there were really, I guess, 4 main criteria that came to mind here. And that starts with playoff appearances / playoff wins. Obviously, titles take precedence of that, but in that same ilk, I think you can kind of group all those together. Like, that is very important to me. You made the college football playoff. That's a significant accomplishment, and I think you should be rewarded. And I'm framing all of this in the college football playoff era, with obviously an emphasis on most recently, and that kind of leads me to my next point is, are you on an upswing right now? Because I think that that's important. And hand in hand with that is just, what's my perception of this program? Like, how do I feel about them? Where do I think things are going? Obviously, that's about as subjective as you can get, because everybody's perception is going to be different about every program that's not named Alabama, Georgia, and probably Ohio State, but maybe even Ohio State. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. To sum that up, is I would say that playoff. What's your playoff resume, and what's my perception? Are you on an upswing?
So we're mostly the same. The only difference is you're prioritizing college football playoff appearances a little bit more than I am. So for me, I'm looking at who's your head coach. This is not in any particular order, by the way. Who's your head coach? What's the talent like on your current roster? And then this one is a little bit vague. Recent history / consistency. Recent history, same thing though as you. College football playoff era, not looking at really anything before that. And then at the end, I'm also considering future. How have you been recruiting as of late? What does the future look like? Is the program stable? All of those things take into account here. And something else I kind of look at is I'm looking at these teams in like a tiers model. So for the top 5, I think I'm going to be a little bit more focused on, can you or have you won a national championship in recent, say, past 5 years, let's say, and then looking forward, could I see you winning a national championship in the next 2 to 3 years? So we're looking at the very short future here, but that's what I'm looking at. So you lead us off here. Give me your number 1 program in college football.
I like that point that you made about, have you won a title, or can I see you winning a title? Like, if I close my eyes, can that happen? Because that I think kind of aligns here. Number 1, I have Georgia. I think that some people might make the case for Alabama, but it's just really hard when you've won back-to-back titles and you look poised to potentially win a third, even if you don't know who your quarterback is. So I have Georgia at number 1.
Okay, so I actually have Alabama at 1, and I was going to put Georgia there originally, but I just can't get over the fact that they have the best coach in the history of college football still, And even though they had a relatively down year this past year, they signed the greatest recruiting class of all time. Like they
I've
had
heard that one before.
they had 9 5 stars in this class. So I think that they're going to be back, and they're going to be back right away. It could be this season, it could be the year after. But I do understand the Georgia point. I guess another part in this for me was, even though they did win back-to-back national championships, I actually think Alabama was the better team in 2021. And I know that they lost in the national championship, but they did kind of beat their ass in the in the SEC championship. And personally, I feel like if Mechie and Jamison Williams were not hurt, Alabama probably wins that national championship game. So I don't put as much stock in the back-to-back part. But you got to look at what Georgia did this year. And I mean, they just dominated pretty much everyone in their path except for Ohio State. So I actually have them at number 2, and I can see why you have them at number 1.
Yeah, and that won't shock you then that I have Alabama at number 2. I definitely get what you're saying with the notion that Alabama may have actually been the better team in 2021, if not for that injuries, I guess I should say. However, that's what happened, I guess. Initially, I wasn't sure if I wanted to weigh head-to-head, because as we'll get into this, I think you'll see that I don't really put an emphasis on head-to-head, just because, and that's probably not fair, which is also probably, it's not how I think of things well in season. I know I've made that case before, to go back to 2018 when everybody was saying Michigan should have been ranked ahead of Notre Dame for absolutely no reason after Notre Dame pretty much smoked them in week 1. But for the sake of this exercise, that wasn't really how I thought of things.
Yeah, I get that. I'm trying not to let this past season weigh too much. Like, I'm trying to look at the full body of work of the past 5 years, like I was saying earlier. But if we're looking towards the future, I know I mentioned Alabama's recruiting class, but then again, what Georgia's got going right now, it doesn't look like they're stopping anytime soon, because Kirby's not leaving. You got to think Saban will get old and retire eventually, whereas Kirby, he could be there for a really long time.
Right. And if I'm recalling correctly, Saban has long said before Kirby got there, that if there were to be a program that could replicate what he had done at Alabama, it would be Georgia if they got the right guy. Looks like that might happen.
Yeah. All right. Who do you got at number 3? Because I think this is where it gets a little bit more interesting.
So I have Ohio State at number 3, and I could see why some people might object to that, given what happened against Michigan the last 2 years. But when you just look at the accumulation of talent that they have on their roster, it's really hard not to put them there. Obviously, they need to figure some things out on the defensive side of the ball, but let's also be frank, they're a made field goal away from winning the national championship game this year. So there is that as well. And that's something that's in the back of my mind. I know that Ohio State fans might not even agree with this, because I'm sure half of them, not that they're all that logical, want Ryan Day run out of town right now, but I have to go with Ohio State at number 3.
I did the same thing. And honestly, I didn't think about this too much, because I know Michigan won back-to-back seasons, and to their credit, they looked dominant in both of those wins in the second half, more so this past season. But going back to the thing at the beginning, where if you close your eyes and said, which team is going to win the national championship sooner, Ohio State or Michigan? I think you're saying Ohio State. And especially considering what Michigan has done recruiting as of late. And again, I know that what happens on the field on Saturdays means more, but coming off back-to-back college football playoff appearances, Michigan didn't sign a top 120 player in this last class in 2023. They've got some momentum in 2024, but you simply need to stockpile talent in order to win a national championship, and that's why I'm giving Ohio State the edge. Although, if they get beat again by Michigan this year, then I have to put Michigan above.
Agreed. And like you said, it also matters when you lose to the arguably worst playoff participant ever in TCU, like Michigan did this past year. So next, I think I'm going to surprise some people with number 4. And frankly, I surprised myself, but given those criteria that I listed out there in terms of titles, and I don't think I would probably have this school here if not for one significant staff addition this past offseason. I have Clemson at number 4, actually. And I know that a lot of people would say that they've been on a downswing, and I think that's fair, despite the fact that they've won double-digit games each of their past 2 down years, so to speak. They have 2 national titles in the college football playoff era. As I alluded to, I don't think I would have them here if Dabo Swinney hadn't decided, you know what, I'm going to go outside of the family again, and I'm going to go get Garrett Riley from TCU. That's exactly what he did, and I'm honestly very unhappy that he did that because, as we know, the Irish had to go to Death Valley this year and see a Cade Klubnik offense that's directed by Garrett Riley. That'll be a challenge. But for those, the titles that they've won, and honestly, I think the impact that Garrett Riley will have on that offense, I have Clemson at number 4.
I'm a little bit surprised. I thought you'd have Michigan there. I've got Michigan at 4. I already kind of went over it. Like, they have an argument at 3, but I do understand that Clemson pick. So is this more so a kind of a bet on the future with Garrett Riley? And you also, not only do they have Cade Klubnik, they also got Christopher Vizina, who we know that Notre Dame wanted a lot too. So they're pretty much set at the quarterback position. And we saw what can happen when Clemson has a really good quarterback. I mean, they won 2 national championships. They went to 4, and it was in large part because they had Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, but they also had maybe one of the greatest defensive lines in college football history. So it's not all the quarterback position, even though Clemson's pretty set there for a while.
True. And I know their recruiting hasn't been probably to the level that it was the last couple of years, but I also think that when you look at the ACC, I know Florida State kind of on the upswing. We'll see how they are this year. I just think they have the easiest path to access to a title of these teams that are in this realm just because of how bad the ACC's been the last 5-6 years. Now they could, who knows, they could leave the ACC soon too. Well, who knows what'll happen there, but assuming that they're still within the ACC, I think that given the weight that I've put on titles and just, I can see you winning a national title, the accessibility that they have there also plays a role.
Yeah. And for as much as Dabo Swinney annoys me, I'm actually starting to come around to him a little bit more because his view of college football is a little bit, or it's way more old school than mine, but I think there are some things that he values that I find myself agreeing with him on a lot as well. So I don't necessarily think that's controversial, but I think my number 5 is, and there's going to be a lot of Notre Dame fans listening that don't agree with this. I'm putting LSU at 5, and I get it. They've been a train wreck ever since that magical season in 2019. But when you look at the programs in winning a national championship, they have everything you need to win a national championship. Maybe not this upcoming season. Like, I don't think they're going to win it all this year, but the program, the recruiting hotbed that they're in, the amount of talent, like they recruited, say what you want about Brian Kelly as a recruiter. They had the number 6 overall class this past year. And I don't think Brian Kelly has to do a whole lot just because of where they're at. And if Ed Orgeron and Les Miles can win a national championship at LSU, Brian Kelly can win a championship at LSU. So I actually have them at 5. Once again, prioritizing, if this team were to win a national championship in the next 3 years, would you be shocked? And I don't think I would be, or anyone should be if LSU did.
You said one thing that was wrong there, that they were only a train wreck last year in terms of special teams against Florida State. They actually, I think, exceeded expectations last year by making it the SEC.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I meant before Kelly.
Yep.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, I also have them at 5. And it's for many
yeah.
of the reasons that you just said. Listen, there are a lot of built-in advantages to being in Baton Rouge. There's a reason ultimately why Brian Kelly left Notre Dame for them. And that reason is he thought it would be easier to win a title there. I think he's probably right. That's not to say that Notre Dame can't win a national title, but is it easier to LSU? Probably. And it's that exact same exercise we keep talking about. You close your eyes. Can you see them winning a national title in the next 3 years? You can. So for that reason, I also have them at number 5, as well as the fact that, like you said, they have a national title to their name in this college football playoff era.
They do. And with arguably the worst coach to ever win it. Like, they had a bunch of things, but they're able to get so much talent in there year after year. And they're always going to be in the mix. They beat Alabama in Kelly's first year. So I think you got to include them, even if you don't want to as a Notre Dame fan. So at my 6th, though, I got Clemson. I actually felt this was kind of low. They missed the CFP in back-to-back seasons for the first time in the CFP era. So their stock is a little bit down. And I'm with you. Had they not hired Garrett Riley, they might have even been lower. And if you're saying, well, how could you put Notre Dame behind Clemson? They just smacked them last year. That's true. But they're a model of consistency. And the fact that we're calling them down years when they went 10-3 in 2021 and then 11-3 this past season, I think that tells you where the program is at. Like, they're just operating at a different standard, and you can't fault them too much just because they had 5 losses in the span of 2 years. Like, that's not that bad. So, plus they've got a top 5 coach. So I'm putting Clemson at number 6. What about you?
Yeah, and that's why I had them up there, because they've actually played the second most college football playoff games of anybody behind Alabama. This was hard. I ended up going with Michigan at 6. I could have talked myself into putting Notre Dame ahead of them, but I think that given the back-to-back playoff appearances, that would have just been too hard to justify. So I do have Michigan at number 6. This is where I maybe contradict myself a little bit because I think I feel more positive about Notre Dame's future than I do Michigan's. And part of that is just because Jim Harbaugh continues to flirt with the NFL every year. I know he said he's done with that. I'll believe that when I see that. You mentioned their lack of just firepower in recruiting, I guess. And I think that that's important as well. But who knows? They could go out there and beat Ohio State for a third straight year, and I just might look like a moron. But I do have Michigan at number 6. And like I said, I had Notre Dame at number 7.
Yeah, what Michigan lacks in high school recruiting, they have sort of made up for in the transfer portal, which honestly infuriates me as a Notre Dame fan because I look at Michigan like, how are they so effective in the transfer portal? Because if academics is getting in the way at Notre Dame, like you would think that it would get in the way a little bit at Michigan. Now, Notre Dame was able to get Sam Hartman, so it's not like they're inactive in the transfer portal. But comparatively, I think Notre Dame should be at a higher level than Michigan, but I'm with you. I had them much higher. So then I've got Notre Dame at 7. What to you puts Notre Dame at 7 above teams like Oklahoma, USC, or like why at 7 for Notre Dame?
I think it's the 2 playoff appearances mainly for in terms of why they're ahead of USC, why they're ahead of Oklahoma. Personally, I feel a lot more confident in Marcus Freeman leading a football program than I do Brent Venables. I mean, that Texas game happened last year. They went 6-6, right? 6-7, something like that. Like they looked bad at times. And yes, I know that Notre Dame lost to Marshall and Stanford. However, they did put it on Clemson and they had a pretty, impressive performance in the bowl game as well. And people feel, I think, stronger about Marcus Freeman than they do Brent Venables going into this. So for that reason, I ultimately put Notre Dame at number 7 there. I also had this pulled up. I think if you look at it, Notre Dame has something like, let's see, I think since 2015, they have the 6th most wins of anybody in college football. Oklahoma's actually 5th. But I do feel a little bit differently just given how that year went for Oklahoma last year.
Yeah, they have, I think, 6 most wins. And if you're looking at how many players are in the NFL, Notre Dame's like 5th. I didn't really take that into account
I didn't
too
either,
much because it all sort of plays a part. Like if you're winning at the college football level, then odds are you're putting a lot of talented guys into the NFL. But if you hate Notre Dame, which I don't imagine most people listening to this do, you would just say all of those wins were Brian Kelly. What has Marcus Freeman done? He lost to Marshall and Stanford. I get that, but you can't just disregard the fact that with the backup quarterback last year, Notre Dame still went 9-4, and like they played Ohio State in the season opener. They played them tight. They played USC pretty well, even though it didn't work out that way at the end. And then from a recruiting perspective, I know that things have fallen off a little bit lately in terms of the 2023 class after Hillman was granted his release from his national letter of intent. Notre Dame still put together a really impressive class. They're already in a great position in the class of 2024. So I think Notre Dame's going to build on that. This is a bet on Marcus Freeman. So I'm not really surprised that you and I both have him at 7. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to points scored and threes made. For my pick tonight, looking at the board here, you know what? I'm taking the Suns over the Nuggets. Book it. FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss a chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. But who do you have at 8?
So that's where I have USC, and they're probably a bit of an exception to my rules here because – let's be honest, they haven't really done anything in the college football playoff era. But here's why. They're poised to win a national title because of that guy they have playing quarterback back there. And as much as I don't like him, he's the best player in college football, I think, by a wide margin heading into this year, right? Is there any doubt about that?
No, and if we do the same test that we applied earlier, like close your eyes, if this team won the national championship in the next 3 years, I would say yeah, I mean,
And
they still got to
frankly,
figure it out on defense, but it could happen.
and that's the only reason why they're not higher, is because I don't know that they have it as figured out across the board otherwise. But that guy is such a weapon and such a threat. I'm not even going to say his name, but we know who I'm talking about. That's the
The
reason that
Heisman
they're at
Trophy
number
winner.
8. Yes.
So this is kind of weird because I actually put Oklahoma at 8, which seems odd because like Oklahoma or USC has Oklahoma's old head coach who made them so consistent. But they were really bad last year, but prior to that, they were almost undoubtedly a top 5 program in college football. And I don't want to penalize them too much for last season because it's easy to forget what happened after Lincoln left. Like he just took so much of what made them so good. Now they still have plenty of talent in the roster, and there's no excuse for getting absolutely housed by their rival Texas. But I think pretty highly of Brent Venables, and he was also like this past recruiting class for them was really impressive. I think it finished 4th. Yeah, it was the 4th in the class of 2023. He's extremely aggressive in the transfer portal. So I'm putting a lot of stock into what Oklahoma does this year. Like if they can't win 10 games this season with Dylan Gabriel at quarterback and then a lot of great transfers coming in, then I'll start to knock them down. I'll start to doubt Brent Venables, but I don't think that's the case. I think they're going to be a really good team this year, and that's why I have them there at number 8.
That's fair, and that's why I have them at number 9. Actually, I guess for the inverse reasons, and this is where I explained how USC and Oklahoma, their, I guess, placements are somewhat exceptions to the rule, but I do have to have Oklahoma in the top 10 because of the fact that they've been to 4 college football playoffs. That's significant enough. I know that the guy that got them there is in Southern California now, but I think you do have to recognize the achievement of making it to the college football playoff 4 times.
Right. And I think one last point on Oklahoma, having Brent Venables, I think better positions themselves once they go to the SEC because you need a really good defense. And Brent Venables can certainly do that. All right. So at 9 for me, I've got Utah. And if we're doing the can you win a national championship thing, I don't think Utah could ever, I don't ever see Utah winning a national championship. But they have been so consistent, and I think so highly of Kyle Whittingham. I have to put him there. So I think they're probably one of the most consistent teams in college football. And then once USC and UCLA leave the Pac-12, they could win the Pac-12 every single year and have a great position in the college football playoff. They've won 3 straight 10-win seasons, if you don't include the COVID year, because they didn't even play 10 games that season. But I think really highly of Utah as a program, so I've actually got them at 9.
Okay, that's funny because I have Oregon at 10 for pretty much the exact same reasons that you mentioned. I could easily see them becoming that dominant force in the Pac-12 once USC and UCLA leave. They've also, this is where I think my college football playoff thing gets a little bit iffy because, yeah, they're one of 7 teams, which is a ridiculous number, but only one of 7 teams to have a win in the college football playoff. It was almost a decade ago. That's the problem. So I don't even know how translatable that is. I mean, the head coach of that team was what would be future, but now former Bears offensive coordinator, Mark Helfrich. So that's how long ago we're talking. That's Marcus Mariota. So I don't know how translatable that is, but I was impressed with Dan Lanning in year 1 too. And I think that they're going to be pretty good this coming year and in the future, and will be poised to really dominate the West Coast. So that's why I have them at 10.
Yeah, I get that. I've got USC at 10, but I also have Oregon at 11, so we can move there. But one last point on USC, the reason why I have them there is this is all on Lincoln Riley. They've been such a disaster in recent years, but as long as Lincoln Riley is going to be the coach at USC, they're going to be in contention every single year. Are they going to be able to win the national championship? I don't know. We saw what he did at Oklahoma, making it to the college football playoff and then getting boat raced almost every single time, except I thought the Kyler Murray year, they put up a good fight, but they're going to be in it. So I've got them at 10, and then I've got Oregon at 11. One thing you didn't even mention about Oregon that I think plays a huge factor in the future is when it comes to NIL, there's few teams doing it like them. So their recruiting is only going to get better and better as the years go on.
Yeah, that's another really good point. And in that same ballpark, I have Utah at 11 because I guess I could see them dominating the Pac-12. Like I said about Oregon, the difference is, and I think it's like what you said, I can't see them winning a national championship. But I do think they have the ability to win and dominate the Pac-12. I mean, they've done it the last 2 years. They beat USC twice last year. So I don't see why that can't continue.
So I feel like when I was doing this list, when I got to 12, I started to look at it a little bit differently because the top 5, I was thinking national champions, like, could this team win it? And then once you got to, like, 6 through 11 is mostly teams, with the exception of Clemson, teams who have not won a national championship anytime recently, haven't even come all that close to it, but every single year, they're gonna be in the mix, and they have plenty of proof. Now, once you get to 12, I think we're sort of moving on to a different tier. Teams who are quality, but haven't really, impacted the college football playoff yet. They haven't really been in the national championship mix at all. So I've got Penn State at 12. Who do you have at 12?
I think I would also frame 12 to 15 as, like, if this was something we were to do year over year, I think this is probably where you'd see the most rotation. Like, there's probably 8 or 9 schools, maybe even more, that have a case to be in there. At 12, I had TCU, and the only reason is because they were in the national championship game this past year. And I think you have to give them some credit for that. Well, also acknowledging that the end of the Gary Patterson era was pretty bad. And so who knows if Sonny Dykes just caught lightning in a bottle last year with the transfer portal. And frankly, that team had kind of some big time 2012 Notre Dame vibes, just kind of escaping by the skin of their teeth and then getting smoked in the title game by an SEC school. But because they're one of 7 schools that has won the college football playoff, they made it the title game. That's why I have them at 12.
I get that. And the fact that they beat Michigan, even though it was a really weird game, I mean, they had 2 pick sixes in that one. That's got to count for something, because as bad as they looked in the national championship, and I know that they're going to get made fun of for it for a really long time, and probably rightfully so. Like, I get that. The fact that they won that semifinal game going up against Michigan, the Big Ten champion, I get why you have them at 12. I mentioned I had Penn State. You could make a pretty decent argument that they should be higher, considering they have 4 11-plus win seasons since 2016. They just won the Rose Bowl, and they have an elite quarterback stepping in, or we think he'll be elite, in Drew Aller. They've also have Nick Singleton, the running back, who Notre Dame really wanted. He was awesome as a true freshman. He's only going to be better as a sophomore. I think that of any of the other Big Ten teams outside of Ohio State, Michigan, like looking at Wisconsin, and then whoever else you want to include in that, they have the best chance to sort of knock them off in these next few years before they get USC, before they get UCLA into the mix there. So as much as I don't like James Franklin's personality, you got to admire what he's been able to do at the program since he's taken over.
So I had Penn State at 13, and the reason they're probably not higher is because they have not made the college football playoff. And frankly, last year, I thought they were the worst 11-win team ever. Like they kind of, maybe the only team that would give them a run for their money is 2021 Notre Dame. But I didn't think that team was very good. They didn't beat anybody. Now, this is probably where a Penn State fan will come in and point out to me that they beat Utah in the Rose Bowl, but I don't really care about that. Cam Rising, it was gross weather, all that. And 2020 happened when they started like 0-5 or whatever it was. That's too recent for me with the quarterback that played for them last year, admittedly. So there's that. And I don't know. They just haven't done enough for me to have them higher up on this list. And I think that they've had the path a lot of years and sometimes they'll beat an Ohio State or they'll beat a Michigan. But at the end of the day, I'm starting to think James Franklin might be the Rick Barnes of college football. Like he has these teams and they just can't get over the hump and get in the college football playoff.
Yeah, you could definitely make a case for that. And another Big Ten team I have in this list, at 13, I've got Wisconsin. And if you wanted to do this list and you wanted to say you shouldn't have Penn State or Wisconsin that high, and your argument was they're the 4th team or third or 4th team in their own conference, they should not be a top 15 program in college football. I hear you, because the top or the 3rd or 4th team probably isn't winning anything any single year. But both of these teams have been really consistent. I know Wisconsin had a little dip, but I also think extremely highly of Luke Fickell and what he's going to be able to do there. Bring in Phil Longo. I can't wait to see what he does with the offense. Like, they're probably clearly not going to be the Wisconsin of old. So this is a bet on Fickell. I think they actually have probably a better chance to be better than Penn State in the future. But looking in recent years, Penn State's been better. So that's why I give them the edge at 12. And that's why I have Wisconsin at 13.
Yeah, and I actually do have Wisconsin at 14 for that reason. And when you take out the last 3 years, which, again, that might be me contradicting myself, although I don't think I put a huge emphasis on recency bias outside of Michigan. They're one of the most consistent programs in the country, and so I think you have to have them there, and I do believe Luke Fickell will do a good job there, so that's how they landed within the top 15 at 14 for me.
Same. And one other reason I forgot to mention why I gave Penn State the edge over Wisconsin was they just have been recruiting at a much higher level. That might change under Fickle, but Penn State has been recruiting at a top 10 level. And I think that has to account for something as we look ahead to the future. Okay, 15.
Yeah, so this is tough. And honestly, after you give yours, we probably need to have a conversation about what it actually means to be viewed in the top 15 because, like, 10 to 15, I think you can make an argument. I mean, you can make an argument for a lot of this, but 10 to 15, it's almost like, really? That team's a top 15 program in college football? And I think it ignores the fact that you've had some kind of group of 5 schools like UCF and Cincinnati even have some really nice runs lately. But I landed on Washington at 15. I think if you look at what Chris Peterson did there, and I know that's a way back, but he did make it to a college football playoff, which is very important in my eyes. They were really good last year. I think I like what Kalen DeBoer has working there, and they'll have Michael Penix back this year. I think they're on an upswing. And they also, like those 2 other Pac-12 schools we mentioned in Oregon and Utah, who says they can't be the one to just get a stranglehold on the Pac-12 once USC and UCLA leave. So I ultimately landed with Washington there. I kind of went back and forth, like, does Cincinnati deserve something because of recency? You could even make a case for like a Michigan State, but ultimately I had Washington there.
Okay, that's interesting. So I'm going to group 14 and 15 together because it's the what have you done for me lately group. And I have I have Tennessee at 14, and then I have TCU at 15. The reason I put TCU at 15, even though like they're in it because they just made the national championship, I think we just like with TCU, it's not like USC where even though USC just had this one great year, I'm very confident in them in the future. I'm fairly confident that TCU will be pretty solid over these next few years, but I got to see a little bit more before I'm ready to make that bet. Tennessee is sort of in the same boat. They had a really good year this past season. I actually think they're going to be really good this upcoming season, and they've been recruiting well under Josh Heupel. What Heupel's able to do with Joe Milton at quarterback is going to be really interesting, and that might alter my expectations for the future because he's basically taking 2 quarterbacks that were, average at best at their previous destinations. Hendon Hooker was pretty good at Virginia Tech. Joe Milton was not very good at Michigan. He turned Hendon Hooker into a Heisman contender, and what he does with Joe Milton is going to be really interesting. He looked awesome in the Orange Bowl, so if he has a great year, that could propel Tennessee way up. But again, still a little bit uncertain about both those schools, so that's why I have them at 14 and 15, respectively.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think if you thought about this a year ago, Tennessee wouldn't even be a part of like the conversation. But I think that that's a very fair point. And given Heupel's track record at UCF and now Tennessee, it's hard to see them falling off. So I totally get why you would have them included here.
Who were some other teams? You mentioned Michigan State, Washington. Who else was sort of in that mix for you?
Yeah, that's where it got kind of tricky. And that's why I felt like I had to put Washington in, is because I didn't want to go with like a Boise State, or even though they're probably up there in terms of wins since 2015, when you think of prominence and they've played on some big stages, like I just kind of had to give the nod to Washington. I think if you look at it, the only 2 schools to have made the college football playoff that didn't make this list for me are Michigan State and Florida State. And if Florida State has another good year this year, then they would probably be on this list a year from now. But I just need to see a little bit more there, and let's make sure that they're not just this year's Iowa State, basically from a couple years ago, where they have a really good year, then they're not that good the year after with the quarterback coming back. But it just got like I felt like I was reaching a bit as we got towards 14 and 15.
I was looking at it from the perspective of does this program with Florida State, I mean, they've got everything you think you would need to be a competitive program year in and year out. But I just
besides money.
Yeah, well, that's true. I just couldn't forget how bad they've been, and I think that they will be really good this season. I know a lot of teams are really high on them, or a lot of people are really high on them. I think they're actually 4th or 5th. They're really high in the betting odds to win the national championship this coming year. I'm not that high on them. But I think another thing that I had to take into account here was their recruiting base. Like, it's pretty crazy that we don't have a single Florida school in here. We don't have a single Texas school in here, which is where –
No, we do. TCU.
Oh, TCU, right. But they're at the very bottom. So you're looking at this, and the fact that there's no Florida school when Florida consistently has some of the best high school football year in and year out. You look at the NFL, there's Florida guys all over the place. And to not have them in there, I just haven't seen enough from Florida. Florida State's close. They could definitely put themselves in there this year. I mean, they finished last year, I think 11th or 10th in the CFP poll, the final one. So they've got some momentum, but I'm going to need to see a little bit more before I catapult them into these rankings.
Exactly. That was pretty much my thought process verbatim.
All right. That's it. That's our top 15. You got any more to add?
No, I'm interested to see how this annoys people. I'm sure it will in some capacity. Probably the fact that Michigan's above Notre Dame for both of us, namely. But I'm interested to see what the reaction is.
Yeah. And guess what? If you are saying these guys are idiots, this list is so dumb, go ahead, do this exercise, give me your top 15, and then find a way to do it without being hypocritical and then, being very subjective and getting things in the way. And you know what? If you figured it out, let us know, and we probably won't listen to it. That's going to do it for me today. Thanks again to Luke, and thank you for making this your first listen of the day. On the way out, remember to subscribe to the show on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, and give us a follow on Twitter at Locked On Irish, on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod, and my personal Twitter account at Tyler Wojciak. That's at Tyler, WOJCIAK. For your second listen, check out our brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball, where experts Isaac Shade and Andy Patton bring you everything you need to know on and off the court, plus hear from big name experts, coaches, and players throughout the basketball landscape. That's Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. I'll see you guys tomorrow.